So welcome everyone. First of all, just want to thank the Together Ensemble 2023 Planning Committee for allowing this side event to occur. It's an opportunity for the communities of the First Nation with Schools Collective just to share some of the heavy lifting they've been doing over the last 5 or 6 years together around First Nation education, change, and transformation. Again, my name is Leslie Waidai. I'm a member of Chippewas of the Thames First Nation of Anishinaabe Ojibwe. And we're going to introduce the panel and have them take up a few questions around why we think First Nation education design, implementation, and control is going to address a lot of the sustainable development goals that Canada has committed to addressing by 2030. So just a little bit about the collective before I hand it over here to these beautiful beings here. The collective is made up of 8 communities and 1 observer, so 9 total. We're all over Ontario, and we're cut up with 5 in the southwestern Ontario, 3 here in kind of central Ontario, and Pekanja come up in the remote north. You can read more about us at the First Nation with Schools Collective website, because we want to spend more time listening to the communities today. And in the chat, I think, Andrew, if you could copy the Google presentation link, you're welcome to go through the longer presentation. I won't be doing that with you today. But the 6 goals of the collective has always been to exercise and assert for full control over First Nation education, overcome historical inequities and funding parity plus, let it be family-centered, strength-based, holistic, and lifelong in its approach, and certainly close the education gaps and exceed them. And then finally, to be a model of excellence in education globally, which I think all of you can agree is SDG 4, Sustainable Development Goal, Quality Education. But there is a large gap that exists, and it has existed for a very long time since contact. And you all know, being mostly from Canada, I believe, on the call, that there does exist a large gap, and for very sad reasons. And this is what the work of the collective has been doing, to undo all of that, to institute a framework of healing, and to pick up their bundles again and reinstitute them in their learning institutions and learning ways. And so we're going to talk about that today with these distinguished panelists, and I'm going to stop talking and now introduce you to the panelists today. So first of all, I'd just like maybe Leroy, if you wanted to start first, introduce yourself, and we'll just do a quick introduction. We're going to come back to you, Leroy.
Okay, my name is Leroy Bennett from Sagamok, Anishinaabe. I work for Lands Resource and Environment, but I also do a lot of other work too, so I'm quite busy. Busy is good, so be watch everybody.
Miigwech, Leroy. Linda?
Ani Bonjour. My name is Linda Trudeau. My Jaganashi name is Linda Trudeau. I am from Weequampong. I am a community representative and resource for Wacomiacong Board of Education, as we are partners in this collective. And on my other interest is that I'm also the general manager for Debaj Majig Theatre Group. Miigwech.
Miigwech, thank you. Joette?
Honey, my name is Joette LaFive. I've been working as the Director of Lifelong Learning for Chippewa of the Thames First Nations. I'm currently the interim advisor, and I am from Pewanuck, Ontario, which is located in Northern Ontario along the Hudson Bay coast.
Miigwech, thanks, Joette. Gail?
Ani Kinawaya, Gishko Makwa Disneykas, Makwa Dodem, Chiging Donjaba. My spirit name is Sky Bear Woman. I am of the Bear Clan and I live in Chiging First Nation on Manitoulin Island. I am the principal of Lakeview School in Chiging. Miigwech.
Thank you. So the question we have for the panelists today are these two questions, and Leroy's going to go first. But the two questions are, why does defining success in your own terms in education matter to your First Nation? And then if that's the case, then why do you think Canada is more likely to meet its sustainable development goals when First Nations define education success in their own way? So I'll hand it over to Leroy.
Okay, so don't mind me wandering over when you see me looking, I'm looking at my other computer. But why defining success in our own terms is basically picking up where we left off historically. We had our own education system. You learned on the land, you did work in teaching lodges or sweat lodges or whatever. There was all kinds of learning that went on at that time. And you only earned those, I don't want to say titles, but acknowledgements that allowed you to move forward to the next steps, whatever those steps were for that individual. But because of, for lack of a better word, genocidal practices, you look at residential school history, 60 scoop, millennial scoop, all of these other things that the government engaged in, that allowed them to convince us that our education system was less than. However, if you take a look at the amount of pretend Indians being caught, it stands to reason that they're starting to see a validity beyond their own methods, that actually First Nations have a higher level of learning as opposed to a standardized approach. Like, you need to know an X amount of things for whatever, pass math or whatever, pass English. But because ours is lifelong learning, it's always been like that. It's always our own people that need to recognize this, but also our own people to recognize that we have full authority to say, okay, this one can move forward, this one needs to relearn this, as opposed to a standard measurement, which may not work for us. So why I'm saying that is because one of the things that we have to include in this all as well is the ceremonial part. And only our people can do that. It has nothing to do with being racist or discrimination. But it all has to do with understanding how things work in the language. And that's sort of the big thing that we have. Because if you're trying to learn the language, it's really hard to do it when you're in the educational model that you have, whether it's at college, at university. I've heard the elders mention that they've anglicized it, meaning that they've put a format in place which actually creates the issues we're trying to solve. Because they mark it a certain way. You have 87%, so you got a good mark. You have 50%. You got a terrible mark. But using that method shames our own people into thinking that they can't speak the language. And we're trying to get out of the shame-based identity that we carry all over the place with us. So when we have our own people who are fully capable of making those determinations that, yes, you know what, we can mark our own people. We can see the deficiencies, but we're the ones who are going to bring them up to a higher level. So I think with that, I say miigwech. It's a short answer.
Miigwech, Leroy. We'll certainly be coming back around. I'm just going to go around then, Linda to Joette to Gail.
Okay, I think I want to echo in terms of what Leroy is stating here in terms of a strengths-based model and looking at people where they're at and having the opportunity to provide guidance to build people up so that they're not in a deficit model and feeling like they're failing. I think the other part of it is that the process of learning in holistic way helps build stronger individuals with that hope, meaning, purpose, and belonging. And that the opportunity to take in various facets that are not standardized at the moment allow individuals to learn and furthermore carry out and become the teachers as they get older. So those are ways I think that why it's important. I think the other part in terms of providing some supports for Canada to achieve its sustainable development goals, I think that one of the first goals is to eliminate poverty. And if we are to, look at the equitable education and improved education numbers for individuals in Canada, we know that over the past 150 plus years, that the numbers of individuals, haven't kept up with the mainstream population. So, those are blatant statistics that tell us that the model is not working. And when we look at poverty and housing and access to clean water, that the opportunity to ensure that people are educated and able to maintain that in a way that helps build and develop within their own communities will definitely help advance the opportunity for Canada. Achievable development goals. But again, Canada can't do that alone. They have to do that with First Nations and Indigenous people of Canada. So if we help carry the load by allowing those opportunities and allowing people who determine how they're able to help carry the load in an equal partnership, then I think, those kinds of things will advance a lot quicker. And the success rates that we see individuals who are able to successfully maneuver through both systems and eventually get to a point where, generations from now, that people will never know that there was an interruption in their ways of being. Miigwech.
Thank you, Linda. Joette.
Thank you, Leslie. I believe that there is no other way except for First Nations to define in our own terms what success in education and lifelong learning means to us. First Nations need to be the ones leading it. There is a great potential to work with First Nations and a powerful strength that First Nations carry when it comes to education and lifelong learning defined by First Nations. And that is carried within the family, the language, and the land. When we have these three components together that work together, the family, the language, and the land, it frames together our definition of lifelong learning success. You begin to realize that this definition of success is demonstrated the strongest within First Nations, within the families of First Nations who have lifelong learning structures, systems belonging to them that is embedded within their family, language, and land. When we realize this, we look at First Nations and First Nation families, and we start to see an education system that needs to be strengthened in Canada. This education system stems from what First Nation families carry, and that is lifelong learning structures and systems, language, and the land. I'm hearing Linda and Leroy speak examples of that and what they shared. So there is a need for stronger realization, transformation to support that definition of lifelong learning success. And that's my answer.
Thank you. Miigwech, Joette. Gail.
Hi there. So why does defining success in our own terms in education matter to your First Nation? This can go on forever and ever and ever, I think, because there's been so many details that we can focus on. But for me, seeing the overall big picture, right? What's best for our community and our families as a whole, and defining that success based upon what we can do for their healing and their nurturing, and finding that holistic balance. So it's important that we're able to nurture the whole being, spiritually, physically, emotionally, intellectually. And that all encompasses our community partners, that encompasses our families, that encompasses meeting the needs of families to get students to school. It provides us an opportunity to learn from experiences as opposed to, okay, this is how we're going to be taught. This is what you need to know. Well, let's learn from our experiences and let's build upon that. Let's take them out on the land and let's see what they can learn from those experiences out on the land. Let's bring the language back into the school system and into the community systems and make it a bigger project and be more accountable to define that pride and self-confidence and that voice for our people. I believe that defining that success is important because we're able to reattain that self-determination. We're going to be able to reaffirm that sustainability that we had previously and develop and live with Mother Earth as opposed to living on Mother Earth and taking what she has to reap, but building upon that as well. And I believe Leslie said a key word was that healing component. We need to heal together. We need to support each other and to be that ear, that body to lean on, and to build each other up. You know, everybody's important. Everybody has something to offer, and we need to think about that and let people share what they have because we're all knowledge keepers in some aspect, right?
Mhm.
We need to be able to share that voice. And we need to continue to think 7 generations ahead. We've seen what's happened to the 7 generations behind us, right? From our ancestors. We need to put that into a new perspective. 7 generations ahead, what do we need to do to be successful for them, to continue nourishing that, to continue nurturing that? Miigwech.
There's so much covered there. But I'd open it up to the panel to respond to each other's comments and build off on them. Lots of important things were brought up. Language and how we assess and move our learners forward and lift them up. And 7 generational thinking, holistic approach centered in healing and hope.
Hi, Leslie, I can start. I know it sounds like I'm repeating these words a lot, but I think there's just so much in there and we just have a short amount of time. But when it comes to defining success in our own way, as I described earlier, Canada cannot meet its sustainable development goals alone, not without working with First Nations to guide and determine the way. When we focus on First Nation families, and I really focusing on the family theme, you know, that carry a powerful strength. We begin to see, as I mentioned earlier, those lifelong learning structures and systems, language and land, and it becomes intergenerational, and that becomes healing, and that becomes redress. And by focusing on the families and understanding the experiences that First Nation families may encounter, you know, that make it difficult to put out, to practice, to determine, to guide that powerful strength that they carry. It helps us identify how we can meet these goals by understanding that family experience. Miigwech.
I think it's also important when you're touching on family to continue those partnerships and that collaboration. And what I'm hearing is when you were talking, Jen, was a lot of we. There's no I, there was no me, right? It was an overall big picture concept. So and that is so important because, you know, we're going to talk about the environment, the social impacts, the community impacts, what we can do so to support each other. So those partnerships and those collaborations need to take part for Canada to meet those SDG goals as well, right? So building upon what Joette, had to say and what Linda and Leroy had said earlier as well. So that sustainability as well.
Yeah, so I think part of the sustainability really is our input being taken seriously, first of all. I mean, I know there's some things we say, and then it becomes a political statement for a little while, and then it falls off the screen. But I think one of the things that have to come out of sustainability is that when we create the environment we want to learn in, that we have to really look at it And we have to ensure that we take it seriously. There's a problem to this relationship if we're not, looking at it from a point that, yes, this is what we fight for, but then we end up doing this in return. And I've seen that over the years where it's kind of like, okay, you guys, you're fighting in the wrong direction, which still would implicate us that it would still implicate us that we're still have to do a lot of interpersonal work for ourselves. I'm not saying everybody's going to be healthy or everybody's going to be on the same page, but what I'm saying is we have to recognize within ourselves as well that how are we going to make sure that our deliverables at the end of the day are met, as opposed to a cut and paste type of job. But I also find it very interesting that our deliverables are also quite, in a sense, challenged if we're not incorporating the cultural or the spiritual aspect. It becomes more challenged. So with that, I say miigwech.
Taking into most of the reflection, I have a little bit challenges with my connection here. So I missed a little bit what Joette was saying. But in terms of the sustainability and through my formal education, that formal education identifies environment, economic, and social components. But what Indigenous people are asking for is to include the cultural components. So when we look at all the sustainability goals here, those are all facets of Indigenous ways of being and Indigenous ways of doing. And when I think about the, messages from our ancestors through petroglyphs, there's the 4 axes that talk about that sustainability and making sure that people are able to take care of themselves, eat good food, have clean air, have safe shelter, are able to hunt and fish and harvest and know how to do those kinds of things. And that's not, I recognize there are people who don't eat meat in Canada, and but finding a way of which provides that support so that you're taking care of your body. And in number 1, it's taking care of this body is your shelter, and you're responsible for it. So I think when I look at those sustainable goals and I hear what I'm hearing from my fellow presenters here, that's at the root of that, how we're taking care of ourselves and how we're being models to our families and our communities and to the nation and to the greater nation of all of us collectively, the human nation. Miigwech.
I might invite folks that have been joining us kind of throughout the presentation to click the link for the Jamboard. I've been typing as the panelists have been speaking on specific things that they envision for their learning systems that I think are important to capture and connect to other SDGs besides SDG 4, what a quality education is. So please go into the Jamboard. You're welcome to add your own ideas there as well. But for the last round to the panelists, then what would be some final things that you would say then about the future of Canada and it hitting its target by 2030 and the role that our communities can play as First Nation leaders, bringing up the next generation of learners?
That's a tough question. I think the deliverables can be met, but our expectations might be high and the government's deliverables might be low. What I mean by that is that they have a couple hundred years of how they perceive us. It's going to take more than just a few years to change that perspective, and it's going to be a hard one because you find it ingrained in everything that we do when we go to school, our jobs, all of these different things. So it's going to take a major shift of some kind. And I can kind of relate that to some of the treaty work I've done. Like I provided all the teachings, did all the ceremonies, all this other stuff. But it took a willingness on their part. And we have to see that willingness, because if we don't see the willingness, we're going to end up really frustrated down the road. So with that being said, then that I'm still a person of concern when it comes to what parts of our culture do we realistically share. In light of all the pretend Indians that are out there, they're all getting caught, right, at high level stuff. So what do we share that counterreacts that complication they induced into the perception of how the governments and the rest of Canada sees us? So it becomes a sort of a push and pull with these deliverables. And I think they are doable, but the time frame might be too short right now. Maybe there's not enough long-term insight to some of that stuff. So with that, I say Miigwech.
Miigwech, Leroy. Others?
So for me, I think sometimes we need to think in two ways. One wearing a moccasin and one wearing a tennis shoe, right? We need to be able to walk in two separate worlds and find that balance, because that balance is so important in maintaining who we are and maintaining our identity, finding our voice, knowing who we are, knowing where we come from, and knowing where we want to go. And that's something I always think about all the time. And to get me there, there's some key factors that I think that follow my way of thinking, and I call it CQI. And I've heard this acronym before. It's just continuous quality improvement. It's that reflection process. You know, what's going on in the community, what's going on in Canada, what's going on in Ontario, and what am I doing? How am I contributing? How's my community contributing? How's the school contributing? How do we actually privilege education within our own communities, right? We need to look at that factor and determine, okay, how do we want to achieve the goals that we want for the students that are most important for us moving forward? So that continuous quality improvement, that reflection component. And I think that's a key component for Canada, meeting those SDGs as well, and being results oriented, right? So with that continuous quality improvement, taking that reflection and thinking, okay, what's my next step? How do I move forward? How does the community forward? How do we bridge the gap? We're always talking about bridging gaps, and we see that in literacy and numeracy right now. There's many gaps that would need to be addressed, especially with COVID, the impact of COVID. So, and focusing on a collective inquiry-based model to meet meet some of those goals and that collaboration. So I just, again, like I said earlier, we can go on and on many different aspects of why would Canada meet those goals based upon what we want to do? I think, honestly, we're a great model, right? We're like the Phoenix. We've come from the fire, and we want to get out there and do our things again and make it realistic and approachable and a reality for our people and our students. Miigwech.
Miigwech, thank you.
So when I look at the sustainability goals numbered 1 to 17, and I think one of the first challenges that United Nations and Canada has is in terms of numbering those goals. And if I was to look at it, I would want to start at number 1. But I think with a holistic approach, what we would do is we would maybe start at number 17 and develop partnership for those goals, and having partners with Indigenous people in Canada to help achieve those goals, I think makes a lot of sense. I think the other one, in terms of peace, justice, and strong institutions, that we need to support the institutions of learning, and that so that we help advance the opportunities for justice and peace in our societies. And then I think of number 10 that talks about reduced inequalities. And if we look at the current models of which Indigenous people are existing within Canada's infrastructure, then we need to be realistic about what those inequalities are. And then I think about if we're looking at that quality education, that some of those matters start to fall into place. We start to have good health and well-being for communities. We have responsible consumption, and and then we have decent work and economic growth, and start to eliminate poverty and eliminate hunger, and that we have informed decision making in terms of clean energy and life below water, and how are we sustaining that, because our water is our life. So just all these components, they're all reflective, they're all intertwined, they're all part of the process. And I think if Canada is looking at these goals and has to look at it through a Western way, I would recommend starting at number 17 and developing those partnerships and making and maintaining strong partnerships with Indigenous people. So that I think part of the challenge, though, with not only First Nations quality educations is Canada's quality of education in terms of being informed of Indigenous people and Indigenous ways of being. So, those we have to get to that point as well, so that we're equal partners in here with equal education as we're moving forward.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Linda.
Gail mentioned the word balance, and when I reflect on my education experience, everything that I've to where I am now have learned about who I am, cultural language, has never come from the provincial education system, has never come from anywhere else except from community and from family. And that, walking in the two worlds and having that experience where wearing my tennis shoe, it was totally not there. That was very harmful. And so when I look back at my moccasin shoe and I'm seeing this wealth, this powerful strength, and that's what I want to learn. That's what I want to gain and continue to gain. And that's what I want to pass on when I think about the work and even this role where I am now, thinking about the future generation. So I think we talked about, a deadline, a year deadline to meet these goals. I think that I don't think we can set a deadline. I think it's when First Nations can feel that, look, there's my moccasin. I feel my moccasin in the presence of a tennis shoe. That's when we've met our goal.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Good.
Okay, good. Thank you. I might invite the audience now to use your chat and just write in one takeaway that you have received from being part of this roundtable with us. It's certainly good. It's good feedback for us, but also makes us feel real good too. And it's great to have that kind of to know you've been listened to and been heard, right? So I want to thank the panelists here today, the roundtable, these leaders in their communities and regionally, and for your time today, for sharing so genuinely, authentically what you believe about the work you're doing for your children in your learning institutions, but also reconstituting, picking up your bundles. And the hard work that is, right? Leroy has said that, we have to believe ourselves as First Nations people that those bundles carry value and are sacred to be kept. And the hard work of what does that look like when you're planning for 7 generations ahead? What does that look like when you're trying to wear 2 shoes, and how do you carry, hope and meaning and purpose in learning institutions? So every individual can find themselves there. So with that, I did want to encourage you, I think, and it's a short time we're here together today. I would encourage you to, advocate for First Nation learning systems, fight for, their ability to actually realize this vision. And that's going to require a change within federal government policy, because First Nation schools are not the jurisdiction of provinces, they're the jurisdiction of their communities, of their people. And But that relationship has been marked by, unilateral policy placed by a federal government, 200 years ago, that decided upon themselves that they were going to unilaterally decide the future of our systems. And now we have to recover from that, which means we need a distinct approach, which means we can't have an approach that looks and feels like a provincial funding model, because we're not a provincial funding system, as you heard here today. So with that, I encourage all the attendees to advocate, talk to your MPs, have them listen that there is a third and very important contributing learning system in Canada, and it's the First Nation schools in their communities, led by these beautiful people here today on behalf of their communities. So with that, I'll just ask Linda if we wanted to close off our session today. It's a hard stop at 11:45, and thank you, everyone. And I don't know if anybody else want to say goodbye or thank you. I'll just hand it over to the panel, and then Linda will close up. Miigwech.
Just like to thanks for all the comments in the chat. It's good to see that. It's like Leslie said, to feel a good moment too. So miigwech.
Just want to say miigwech to everyone. I'm grateful for everyone who is able to attend today. Miigwech.
Yes, miigwech everybody for attending, and thank you for listening. And we're looking at the feedback here. Again, much appreciated. Thank you kindly.
I want to express the opportunity to share my gratitude with having the ability to have this opportunity here today for all of us, and to be with all of you, and being welcomed into your homes, into your workspaces, and into your lives, even if it's just temporary. But in that, I want to thank you all for being willing to hear from us, and hopefully be partners in terms of developing those and achieving those sustainable development goals, but also furthermore, creating and developing a path forward so that there is a good life forward for people. Most of our country is on fire at the moment, and there's lessons to be learned from that, and as we work together, we can work at minimizing some of those effects. And I think about the sustainable development goals and those mitigation of climate change effects within our communities and our societies. So with this closing, I'd like to thank you for listening to us, using your ears, and using your mind, and bringing your heart to this. And at the same time, thank the Creator for keeping our families and our communities and ourselves safe while we were here together collectively and unifying us. So, miigwech.